So let me ask you a couple questions here. How many of you have a teaching philosophy? Okay. Those of you who don't have your hand up, raise your hand. Because you all have one, but you just don't have it written down yet. How many of you are here because you want to either develop a teaching philosophy or a written one, or you want to improve the one you have? Okay. How many of you are here because it fit your time slot, you had to be here anyway, and you got to be here like for credit? Okay, yeah, it's part of your job. Okay, good. My goal here is to have you more enthusiastic, if you haven't written one yet, to be more enthusiastic about writing one. And to do it in a way that's not a formula so that, how many of you, by the way, are graduate students? Wow. How many of you are not? How many of you are some other form of life than graduates? Okay. Well, good. How many of you would like to, at some point, have a real job? Good. Okay. See, I like to get everybody participating right away. And how many of you want a job at a place where you would do some teaching, like a college professor, right? Okay. So it's possible you're going to need to write one. And I want you to write one that is not a formula, okay? And I want you to make your teaching philosophy yours, no matter the purpose or the audience that you write this for, all right? Okay. Let me do this. Let me just have you go around, tell me your first name and your area, okay? Not just academia, but you know, like psychology or physics or whatever. All right. Let's start over here.
Oh, my name is Juana, and I'm in applied statistics.
Great.
Juana, I'm with the Department of Counseling.
Oh, good.
I'm Erin, and I'm with the Department of English.
English.
My name is Adrian Pan. I'm in the Department of Computer Science.
Okay.
My name is Oscar. I'm in mathematics.
My name is Nick. I'm a biological anthropologist. I'm John Shin, computer science.
Okay.
Maria, Spanish.
Okay.
Emmanuel in physics. David from statistics.
Lisa from music education.
Great.
My name is Igdar. I'm mechanical engineering.
Okay.
Iman from education, calculus.
Okay.
Desiree, Public Administration.
Great. Okay. Just to get a sense of who I'm dealing with here. Okay. I'm going to say a couple of things. By the way, these things are great if you do teaching. How many of you teach your own courses? Good. How many of you are assisting somebody else? Okay. These are great things. They're laser pointers. Watch how they work. It's really good. So the first thing we're going to do, doesn't that work good? Okay. All right. A little technology for you. The first thing we're going to do is talk about these three things really quick. And the reason why we're going to talk about them, see, these things actually don't work. The reason why we're going to talk about them really quick is because you can Google teaching philosophies and get basically everything you need to know. So then I'm going to talk about something that nobody else talks about that you can use. Okay? Because most people only write one, but most people have read lots. I've read hundreds of these in various capacities to help people write them and for job applications and things like that. When you read more than 3 of them, they get really boring unless they have something to do with the person who wrote them. Okay? So the first thing you want to figure out is, who are you writing this for? Who are the potential audiences for teaching philosophies? This is where you actually say some things to. Department heads. Okay. Who else?
Search committees.
Search committees. Who else? For your students as part of your syllabus. Okay. Absolutely. Who else? Bingo. See, if I waited long enough, I knew. Absolutely, right? And sometimes we assume that, but sometimes we don't. That slips our mind. The idea is that we can write a philosophy that will help us teach even if nobody else reads it. Okay? And I would argue that the process of having to put it down in writing so that somebody else can understand it is going to be really important and will make it better. All right? Okay. Purposes. Why would you write one? Other than because it's really fun and you got nothing else to do.
Try to get a job.
Trying to get a job.
To share,
To share with.
we just cancel. Just say.
There you go. Okay. So just to have information out there. Okay. Good. What else?
Make a statement.
To make a statement. Okay. And again, I could say to whom, but then we have our list of audiences. Okay.
Where you're going. So to see how you're thinking and if it really applies to what you're doing.
Bingo. That's another good one, right? The philosophy should be a hallmark, should be a benchmark, should be a set of criteria that you can use to measure what you do. Now, by measure, I'm not going to talk statistics, but we can measure it statistically, mathematically, but we can also measure it qualitatively. But we want to have some way to measure. How do you know that you're doing what you want to do? Okay. A lot of you wrote on your graduate school applications. You wanted to teach and help people and do all that good stuff. How do you know that you're doing that? Philosophy can help you do that. All right? Content. This is where I'm going to spend very little time because I find this the most boring part of the deal. What you do, classroom instruction, okay? But you want to do more than classroom instruction because teaching involves more than that. Okay? So it involves advising. It involves, listen to this, meeting students in the hallway. The research shows that the most meaningful interactions students have with professors are outside the classroom. And therefore, if you focus your philosophy only on what you're doing in the classroom, you're missing the opportunity for inspiration. So you can do advising and chance meetings and other kinds of meetings, mentoring, research supervision, all that stuff comes under teaching. All right? Anytime you're doing something, and a student is there, you're teaching. And anytime you're doing something with a student in mind, you're teaching. And so your philosophy can cover all of that. All right? All right, now before we get to the main event, how many of you don't have one of these cards? Okay, so why don't you pass those back? Good. What I want you to put on this card, do not put your name, okay? But I want you to put on this card a sentence that you either have in your teaching philosophy or you think you would have, okay? Just write a sentence. I've never done this before, so we're going to see if this works. But I think it's going to be really good. I think it's going to be really good. Do not put your name on it. Okay. While we're waiting for the last few people, because I want everybody to have one sentence that they have. Couple ways to go in terms of the content. I think it's really intriguing to write a teaching philosophy such that after somebody's read it, they do not know what department you're in. Okay? Because I think most teaching philosophies that I've read start with, I teach in the Department of English, Computer Science, whatever. And wouldn't it be cool, because some of what we teach or some of how we teach, and the philosophy of teaching can be so broad that we can write one without reference to our subject area. All right? So think about that. Another thing, if you want to go flip to the other side, is that you can write a philosophy that uses your discipline as a metaphor. Okay? My own philosophy, which you can find on the web if you look hard enough, is a therapeutic metaphor, because I was trained as a clinical psychologist. And so I see teaching not as therapy, but using some of the same principles, okay? Especially ethical principles. Okay? So I've seen teaching philosophies in which people describe their approach as a scientific approach because they teach in the biology department or a physics department. And they are teaching students how to collect data, how to analyze data, how to think scientifically, how to test hypotheses. And in their teaching, that's what they do. They give tests, which are data that they analyze, and it helps them form hypotheses about what's going on. Pass your index cards to your right, and I'll collect them and we'll use them later. We could just put them together randomly and see if we have a teaching philosophy. I guess we could do that. Okay. Are there any questions at this point? Or if there are anything, is there anything that you would like to know that you think I may not get to about these first three areas? Yeah.
you're saying you don't want to spend a lot of time on content. What I get from that is that you think that the teaching philosophy statement itself would be so strong that if you were using it as part of a job application, it wouldn't matter if it really was specific to the department.
Yeah, that's correct. And because the assumption that I want to create in somebody who reads my philosophy would be, this guy can teach anything. Okay, not that we want to assign them to all these things that we don't want other people to teach, but the idea is that teaching is a set of skills. Okay, and therefore we want to focus on those skills rather than it's like sales or entrepreneurship. An entrepreneur can open up a business and sell anything, right? Now, in terms of content, remember it's what kind of pedagogy you use, okay? How you deal with students, how you assess your teaching, which can be how you assess students, but it also needs to be how you assess yourself. And it should also have something in there about improvement. That is, how do you know when you're not doing well? How do you know when you're doing well? And what steps do you take to improve your teaching? A lot of, especially on job applications, a lot of teaching philosophies is, here's what I do, here's my favorite activities in class, and here's my evaluations. And that's not a philosophy. That's a statement of achievements. And you ought to have one of those in your application, but that's not a philosophy. Okay, so what is a philosophy? The stuff that we'll focus on are things like, what principles do you operate under? Okay, this idea about how do you know when you're doing well? By what criteria do you measure what you do? Okay. What values do you have? Why are you in teaching in the first place? Okay. And so it should be a statement of passion. Okay. Now you don't want hearts on it, but because you won't get the job if you have that. But it should have something about why you want to do this more than you want to do anything else, other than research. Okay. Yeah.
Do people ever create multiple philosophies for different audiences, or do you try and address all audiences within a single philosophy?
That's the choice. And people do both. I'll tell you my own bias. It's a bias because I don't have data. But my own bias is to write one that is applicable to everybody. What am I hiding from my students by writing a shorter one than for my department chair or my RTP committee, my retention, tenure, promotion committee? So for me, I want to write it in such a way so that everybody knows where I am, and everybody understands that everybody else is reading it. That's why I put mine on the web. But there are times when, for a job application or something like that, either they ask for something specific in your philosophy that you want to do, or for the purposes that you have. For example, if you want to get your students to do well in your class, it's possible that they don't have to read everything, but they want to read a part of your philosophy or a separate philosophy that has to do specifically with that class. But I have another document that I have when I teach introductory psychology. I have a document that says how to take this course. And that's where I put, here's your responsibility, here's what your philosophy should be. Do the reading, come to class, study in groups, all that other stuff. And then I have a bunch of study techniques and reading techniques and all kinds of stuff. That's also on the web, by the way. So yeah, that's a good question, and there's no prescribed answer to that. I think it's kind of cool, if you're applying for a job, to say, here's, teaching philosophy, here's the philosophy that I give to my students every semester. And that now, some of you may not share that value. All right? My value is transparency. I've been trying to be as transparent as possible without being invisible. Okay? But the data suggests that if students know why you're doing what you're doing, they'll come with you more than if they don't, if they have to figure it out. Okay? So that might be, again, it's something to think about. And as you think, by the way, we're not spending a lot of time on those things, but I'm not saying they're not important. So when you think about that, you think, why am I writing this? What do I want? And this is, you write a philosophy the same way you teach a course. You start backwards. You start with the end and say, what do I want my students to come out with at the end of this course? What do I want my department chair to think about my teaching? And if they come in to watch me, would they recognize? It would be great for all of you to do your teaching philosophies And then everybody teaches a class, and then have people try to figure out which teacher goes to which philosophy. All right? So the idea is, would students know? One of the things that we've done in workshops is to have people read a philosophy and they haven't met the person yet. My wife, actually, who deserves a lot of credit, her name is Margie Crest, and she does a lot of this work on philosophies. And what she does is have people read my philosophy, anonymous. Okay, they don't know who it is. And I'm in the room, and then she says, what would you expect from this teacher? Which is really intimidating for me. But I get really good feedback about my philosophy because I hear, well, I would expect this teacher to be, you know, such and such and such and such. And if that's a really good thing to do, is to give this to people who've never had you as a teacher and say, what would you expect from this? And if they expect, oh, I think they'd be really distant or aloof or, you know, arrogant or all that other good stuff. If that's what your values are, great. But if not, then you know that something has to change. Okay? And so, again, it's a good way to collect some data.
The opposite. I believe this teacher should be perfect.
I think that's good because that's something to shoot for. Okay? And in fact, if your students believe that you are trying to be perfect, it's much better than if they think you're assuming imperfection. Yeah. But then again, what would that perfection look like? For me, high standards, high support, right? And that's often the feedback I get now.
Basically living up to the statement itself.
I'm sorry?
Living up to the statement.
That's it. These are, and that makes a segue, I think, to the next piece of this. It's living up to ideals we have. This is not, well, you know, your goal here, you didn't write on your graduate school application, I want to be a mediocre teacher, okay? Right? You say, oh, I'm going to be really good, right? And if that's true, clearly we never get to perfection, but we can get close to it. And we can, and we need to know in which direction we need to move and where the slippage is, okay? And to some, one of the writing issues that I didn't put up here is voice. Do you write this in first person, third person? I've read philosophies that are treatises, and it never mentions the person who wrote it. It's all about, well, education is this, education is that. And you know what? Most people who read philosophies don't care about what you think about education. They care about who thinks that. And so writing it in first person, I think, is a really good idea. All right. All right. So let me, oh, I'm sorry, are there other questions, issues?
That's just a quick one. I don't know if you're going to address this later. How long should it be?
It depends on the purpose, the audience. Okay? It should be written in language that is so simple that even administrators can understand that. The length, usually it's like a few pages max. Okay? What would be interesting, you could have different versions. You can have a long version for yourself and then take pieces of it, maybe different pieces for different populations, or just make it shorter for the statement that you want to make to other people. But usually, I think in a job application, a couple pages single space is all people are going to read before they have to go on to the next piece of information. Okay? Which means you have to focus on stuff that's really important. And that, again, is a segue to what comes next. If we had more time, I'd ask, what do all these things have in common? Okay? And notice, they have in common, they're all meters of some kind. And, as you know, especially from this one, from the gasoline thing, the right-hand column goes really fast. Okay? The next one goes slower than that, but still pretty fast. The next one goes much slower. Next one goes slower than that. And when you get, let's see, well, yeah, when you get down to these really left-hand ones, they hardly move at all. All right? So I'm going to tell you what you need to take notes on. This is the only bit of notes that you need to take. Your goal in the philosophy is to have in there the stuff on the left. The further it is to the left, the better it is, which means it's the stuff that doesn't change. Okay? If you have, for example, and I hope none of you have this, but if you do, I'm making a statement not about you as a human being, but just about your philosophy. You should not have in your philosophy that you use PowerPoint. That's not a philosophical statement. Okay? Now, here's why. Because if somebody told you there's a better way than PowerPoint, you would change it in a minute. It would be different tomorrow, right? But if somebody said, you know what, I think you should start exploiting your students, you would say, I don't think so, because that respect you have for students is never going to change. All right? Let me take you through the, there we go. So we'll use this counter, all right? And again, this goes really fast, and these go progressively slower. We're not going to do all those columns, but we do a few of them. The first column is behaviors. What do you do in class? I walk into the room. Is that a philosophical statement? I think you can see this. That's not perfectly philosophical, all right? But these are specific behaviors. This is things like, I explain the concept of independent variables to my class, okay? Very specific, all right? Next, I'm going to bring this with me. Techniques, okay? And this is where you say, well, I use rubrics, or I use think, pair, share techniques. How many of you have heard of think, pair, share? Good. Those are nice, but again, if somebody told you, you know what, I got something better than think, pair, share, you would say, oh, good, let me try it. So it's going to change really fast, all right? Next, strategies. Okay, this means I believe in using active learning techniques. Okay, so we're not saying which techniques they are, right? Strategies. Does anybody want to explain the difference between techniques and strategies?
Technique is a concept, but strategy is how you put that concept into action.
Actually, I'm going to argue that it's more the reverse. That is, techniques are more specific. Yeah. Strategies are longer term. Yeah. There's a famous chess saying that says technique is knowing what to do when there's something to do. Strategy is knowing what to do when there's nothing to do. Okay. So the idea is strategies are more long term, they're more general. So a rubric is a technique. But informative assessment is a strategy. Okay. All right, so what comes next? And by the way, so these three are the most simple. I believe you can write a philosophy without these. Okay. Now you can have some stuff in there about active learning or PowerPoint, stuff like that, but they have to be examples. They're examples of your primary focus of the philosophy. And here we go. And these three, by the way, I'll do three more. These three the order of these can shift. I'll explain that. What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Why do you know, when somebody says I use PowerPoint, oh, and green PowerPoint. Why? And if you say, well, because it's green, right? It's not good enough. Why do you use PowerPoint? Hold students' attention. It's easy. It's more fun. Whatever it is. And then what are you trying to accomplish? Okay? Beyond goals. Now the goals I'm thinking about are kind of educational goals. Okay. Next, principles. Okay. What principles do you operate under? And usually it's a very small number. Okay. Because these principles are even more general than strategies. Okay. One of the principles I have is respect for students. Okay. And that's a very hard one to live up to. Really hard. But knowing that that's one of 3 or 4 principles I have means I'm thinking about it like all the time. Okay. Somebody once asked me, are you ready for a story? You want to hear a little story? I was going to say regression. It's not. It's digression. Somebody in a midterm evaluation wrote on their midterm evaluation, I don't understand how you're so enthusiastic every day in class. So I wrote back. I didn't write back. I came back the next day and I said, here's my answer to that. I said, sometime during this semester, I'm going to have an interaction with one of you that will change your professional life. You know, that's my assumption. The trouble is, I don't know who it is, and I don't know when it's going to be. So I have to treat every moment as if it's one of those moments, right? So, but that's a principle, okay? And that drives everything else, all right? The other issue is that these are hierarchically arranged so that my principles will justify my goals, or my goals will justify my principles, okay? One more level, values. What do I believe is important? So, the further to the left we go, the more it should be in your philosophy. Which means you can write a philosophy on an index card, because it's going to be 2 values, 2 principles, a couple of goals. Okay? And people should be able to infer what it's going to look like in class. This is like what you're thinking, right? This is what it looks like. People should infer what it's going to look like by your values and your goals and principles. Now, I said these are kind of interchangeable because values can be really broad values, like human beings are worthy of respect, or they can be really smaller values, more tied to teaching. Okay, teaching should be a human enterprise or something like that. Same thing with principles and goals can be, what are my goals for a particular course? What are my goals for a particular session? What are my goals for education in general? Or what are my goals for students at this university? So you can pitch them anywhere. And that's why when you do this, this is not a formula. It's not like, well, values have to come first and then principles. These can be, you can play with these, okay, and see what works, okay. And the idea is that the more areas of activity that it covers, these things cover advising, research mentoring, class, pedagogy, everything, all right? These do not. Behaviors are specific to, particular interaction. So the further to the left, better it is. Okay, so for example, let me try this. One of the behaviors I use is I have short papers due in my intro psych class called PROPS, Processing and Reflecting on Psychology. Okay, and they have to have one like almost every class period, and they have to do it over the reading. All right, so doing those props would be a behavior. The technique is the assignment itself. I have people do more than summarize what they've read. They have to do something with it. If they ask a question about it, they have to answer that question as best they can. And that would be my technique, is to have these props. They have students do the reading and then do something with them. The strategy is using writing as a metaphor, as a way of thinking, and as a way of doing the class, as a way of learning. Okay? My goal there is to develop higher order thinking, even in introductory classes. And my other goal is to have students do the reading so that they're prepared for class discussion. All right? Now, my goal of having students do the reading covers every class I teach. But how I do it, my strategies and techniques and behaviors are different for every class. Okay? But the goal to have students do the reading, the goal of higher order thinking, permeates every class I teach, and to some extent, research mentoring and all that other stuff. The principles. A couple of the principles I operate under is that learning takes practice. Therefore, having students do something is usually better than having them not do something. Okay? So anything active, and students ask me, can we see more videos in class? And I say, no, you can see all the videos you want out of class. In class, we're going to have to do something because active is better than passive. So that's a principle I have. It's not foolproof, but it works really nicely when somebody says, can you give us a study guide for the test? Or can we have more videos? Or can we have guest speakers? Or whatever it is. All right? I have a way to judge that. And my values, one of it is that empirically supported pedagogical techniques are better than those that aren't. Okay? So, because I'm a scientist. For those of you who are in the hard sciences, I'm only a psychologist, but still, I try. Students are more than passive receptacles, okay? And learning is best when there is hard work that's really fun. Okay, how many of you are familiar with the concept of flow? Anybody? It's a really good concept, right? It's like you take students to the edge of what they can do with some support for taking the next step, okay? So that would be a value that I would have. And notice that I could portray those values as principles, and I could portray the principles as values. It doesn't make any difference. If you get this connection, right, between these three and these three, then you got your money's worth. Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read these and see where you are. Okay. And I'm just going to mix them up. I'm not going to do a Karnak, but I'll just read them in random order, and then we'll talk about these. Are there any questions before we get started on this? Okay. So let's see. And this is, by the way, having this stuff in here, if I read stuff that's, down here somewhere, it's not a bad thing. The question is how we tie it to some of the broader issues, all right? And you can have in your philosophy an application section, examples, okay? And again, that would make it longer. And it's like newspaper articles, that you cut from the bottom. You want to write I think you can write your philosophy the same way. Have the most important stuff right up front. Because most people who read it may get bored after a paragraph. So you want to have your best shot up front. And then you can say, here's how I actualize these values. Right? And then if you need to cut that, because you're only allowed one paragraph, you have it. Okay? Enthusiasm is contagious and motivational. What would you say? Principle? Okay. Could be a value. Okay. Well, the value here is enthusiasm is important, or motivation is important, or something like that. But the principle is enthusiasm, contagious, motivational. That's way up there. What does this person teach? Don't know. But I want to be in their class. Okay? Because I want to catch it. Whatever she has or he has, I want to catch this disease. All right? So that's good. To inspire students.
Goal.
It's a goal. See, but for me, that goal would be way up, right? Okay. Facilitate student learning through reflection, through reflection, hands-on activities, experiential activities. We could take a vote. I think it's strategies, but it's framed as a goal, so it's pretty good. It's pretty close. Okay. Facilitate student learning is a goal. Reflection, hands-on activities, experiential activities. There's an implied value in there. There's an implied value, which is pretty close to the surface. But that, I think, we're talking about anything hands-on is good. Might identify strategies. Improve. This is like preaching to the choir here. What am I going to tell you? How am I going to improve this? Improve student knowledge and future while continuously improving my teaching skills. The improvement, I think, implies that goal. And others of you are going to have to respond to these too. We're going to have to take votes, I think. You have to lock in your answer.
Some principles in there too, like improving continuous learning.
Yeah. And there's a value implied here, and that is that education should be more than 16 weeks at a time.
It's a payoff of values, for what really is a strategy.
Yeah. The idea is that these have to be justified by these. That is, you have to tie it back. All right? And so that consistency that somebody mentioned before between our philosophy and what we do, that's the connection among all these. Remember, this is the same box. This is you, right? And you want to have some connection. And these behaviors, by the way, are important in terms of implementation, because very few of us think of our philosophy when we're developing a test. When we're developing a test, all we're thinking about is how long does it have to be? Can I write questions that students can't complain about later? Those aren't higher values. But if we add those higher values in, and we look at our philosophy, or remember it, while we're making up a test, it's going to be at least a little bit more fun. And by the way, the data suggests that self-testing, or testing what you know, is more effective as a learning strategy than reading. Okay? So what we should do is actually do tests every day, and then, oh, by the way, once every 3 weeks we would read something. Okay. Now that's a technique that I'm not sure can be justified, but you get the idea. Okay. This one was upside down. How did you write that? Oh, upside. Teacher is a wonderful job in the world and a hard job. And then the other is develop thinking skills. Okay. First one, teaching is a wonderful job in the world. And yeah, that is, yeah. When somebody, think about, and I'll do this kind of in a simplistic way, but you got 2 job applicants. The first job applicant says, I use green PowerPoints. It's the way they start their teaching philosophy. And then one of them says, teaching is the most wonderful job in the world and the hardest job. Who are you going to hire? Right? I mean, you know. Develop thinking skills. Skills. Yeah. Now that is really close, not close, but it leads to strategies. It drives. Another way to think about this is which of these drives most of your behavior. Okay. The further to the left, the more these things drive what you do and can be used for everything. So this idea of developing thinking skills is a goal that can drive everything. Because no matter when you say, I'm going to use active learning, why? Developing thinking skills, right? The techniques, you can judge by that. Okay. This is great. I don't know if you're having a good time, but these are really fun to read. I want to be a good example for my students. Not just as a professional or a teacher or an expert in my field, but as a good person as well. Huge, huge values. Yeah. This is, first of all, it's a long sentence. So that was really good. And it has all this stuff. Notice, what does this person teach? Okay? The thinking skills one, we all have our own way of thinking skills in terms of like computer science, we think, and statistical thinking and empirical thinking and testing hypotheses and all that. So we can think about those. This one, I want to be a good example as a person. What does this person teach? Okay? So that's really cool. And it has this value in here that teaching is more than just the content. Remember, there's data to suggest, I forget, it's on one of those YouTube videos that shows how the world is changing so fast. And it's like 75% of what a chemistry major learns as a freshman is obsolete by the time they graduate, right? So if that's all we're doing, if all we're doing is teaching these things that change all the time, we're obsolete. Because people can get this stuff. They can Google most of what you know, okay? But they can't get to how to be a human being, all right? And so this is a very high value. And it implies principles of action, all right? And by the way, it goes back to the golden rule. So there's some philosophical support. I believe that every student has the inherent right to as much access to me as a teacher as possible. Value. But look at the strategies that it's going to, that can be implemented about this.
It goes to that out of class image.
Yeah. Access means out of class. Okay.
Or even, you can call me home if it's a real emergency, but only one time a semester.
See, now this is interesting. What's your policy about giving your home phone number, office hours, things like that? And we can talk about some of that, and the answer is going to be really specific. Each of you will have a specific policy that may differ, but are ways to actualize some goals or principles that we can agree on. Okay? And I love this one because it has a loophole the size of Montana. As much access to me as a teacher as possible. All right? Which is good because it's realistic. Okay? And it has to be implemented in the real world. I think it's the Boy Scout handbook or the lifeguard handbook or something, it says the first duty of a lifeguard is not to drown. And the idea is we have to, and there's a colleague of mine at the Air Force Academy named Bob Noyd who talks about over-teaching. Right? There's only so much you can do as a teacher, and then students have to do some things as well. So deciding what's our responsibility and what's students' responsibility is really important. But we live in a golden age now where we can text, we can be a twit, we can do all kinds of things to increase our accessibility. Email, you know. Okay. Make students learn even after class. It's principle. Okay. Now, this is interesting because when I read that, I thought, make students learn is an interesting value. Okay. Can we do that? Okay. I'm not sure anybody can learn against their will. Okay. So the question then becomes, again, it harks back to something that's really important to think about, and that is, what's our role with students? Can we make them do it? Can we force them? Do we present it and let them take it? Or do we make it so inspirational, so enticing, so contagious that they can't help themselves? Okay.
Depends on your definition of make.
Yes. How do we, what does that mean?
I mean, you make a meal, you know, or that's not a force, that's presenting.
Make students learn. It sounds like we're trying to get students to do something. And the question is, how do we do that? You know, my training, a lot of it is in psychotherapy. And it's like, we can't make anybody change. But we can set circumstances. We can create conditions. And by the way, those conditions may vary depending upon who we have in our class. And so we need to know I'm going to say something, you tell me where it is. We need to know who we're teaching. What's that? It's a principle. I think it's a principle. Because then that leads to having students introduce themselves the first day, or having them write something about themselves, or something like that.
Also, this principle reflects the values of the person who
Yes.
wrote that, because he is like making instead of helping or facilitating another person.
Yes. And it might be making with that emphasis, or it could be making students learn. It's possible that what they meant was inspire. We don't know. It's possible that what they meant was force. Okay? But that value, it would be fun to talk to this person about what that value is and how we might express our principles to get that value expressed in the best possible way.
When you're talking about creating an environment,
Yeah.
that's like making.
Yeah, and you know, well, that's interesting because, like in psychotherapy, we say, well, some people say, well, therapy is like the therapist manipulates the client in order to change. And we say, well, but it's with the client's agreement. That's what the client's there for, to be manipulated. So, in fact, when we look at this as two agents, you and the student, and by the way, being in graduate school is cool, right? Because you go from being a student to a teacher, you know, minute by minute, right? So you can look at this in from both sides. We don't know what this person, you know, we're saying like, oh, this is not so good. I'm not sure it's not so good, all right? Because if what we're saying is I'm going to do everything I can to force the issue as much as I can, then that's really good, okay? I want students to appreciate human diversity through their learning experiences and then something about through their life experiences. Okay, I think that can be a goal. There's a value implied about diversity, and principles can stem from that. So this is where I think this goal may be up higher on the hierarchy, can really drive the principles that we operate under. In terms of, see, for me, this would be consistent with student interaction in class, okay? Something like that. All right, couple more, and then let's do something else. Don't show students the answer. Guide them to discover it for themselves. Ah, okay. So have some controversy. Somebody tell me what they think and why. Who said, somebody said strategy and techniques. Tell me more.
It's like a tool. So I'm using these to make my goals or principle values.
Okay. It's a tool, as stated. Now, see, some of you are already taking this and saying, what's driving this? Okay. But I think, as stated, don't show them the answers, guide them to discover for themselves, is a tool. I think it's a strategy because we're not talking about exactly what answers or how that might happen, whether this is in class or on a test or whatever.
Ultimately, it's a principle.
What's the principle?
The principle is not I'm not going to, I'm going to teach you by helping you to learn to teach yourself. It's like motivation, teacher motivation.
Okay.
That's a principle that drives the whole thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
No, that's
Well,
just
here-
not how it was stated. If it was stated the other way, then it would mean something different, but it was framed as a tool.
Yeah. See, I think, and this is where, here's another little bit of advice you want to take notes. If you have a principle that's behind this, say what it is. Right? This is implied, and people can see. When I first read this first half, don't show them.
Why?
Well, my first response was I didn't read the answer, and I'm saying don't show students. And I'm thinking, well, what are you hiding from students? Right? And so my first response was not good. Then I said, don't show them the answer, guide them. Oh, okay. This I agree with. This is wonderful, right? Because there's a good goal here, and the goal is students will learn to do things, to guide themselves, to solve problems, that kind of stuff. But that's not what's stated, okay? The principle may be clear, but it may not. And so in your philosophy, you can, when you look at these and do this exercise at home, the home version of this game, okay? You can all get index cards and play the home version, okay? I'll send you the PowerPoint slides. And when you do that and you say, all right, what is a reader gonna interpret here? And is my principle stated or not? I think we're talking about somewhere around here. I think it's a strategy. I think it's a goal. But the principles are implied, and we might know because we're sitting in the same room. We know that this is a nice person and has good principles, but it could be more clearly stated. All right. And the idea is you want to nail it. Okay. This is, for me, this is a second paragraph kind of thing. Right. The first paragraph is, I believe that students should come out of college with abilities, with skills, rather than just knowledge. Therefore, when I have the choice, I'm not going to show them the answer. I'm going to let them develop that. All right? So when it's tied like that, and by the way, you might have this whole tree, right? You got one value or two values. That drives 5 principles. That drives 20 strategies. By that time, you don't have room to just put in PowerPoint.
How about by using the verb in order to differentiate between all these elements? For example, the value usually is I believe, and for the goal, the student will be able to, or
See,
strategies
there we
to
go.
implement. So the
Yeah.
verb will indicate which one is principle.
That's a really good idea. That's real, yeah. Values, I believe, or it's important that. It's important to me, okay? Principles, for me, principles come from the outside. Values come from the inside. And so they can be consistent, but principles are something that I think everybody could act on, okay? Goals, yeah, at the end, here's what should happen. Here's what should be, okay? Strategies, here's how I'm going to think about what I do every day. Techniques, here are some things that I do on a regular basis. And of course, behaviors is, here's what I'm doing now. Okay? So that's the idea. That's really nice. Okay? How do other people think about it? Are there any other ways that you think about this to help make sense of it? See, this is where I'm not telling you the answer. I'm guiding you to an answer for yourself.
It's a bit like, now that we're thinking about this, it's a bit like Bloom's taxonomy,
Yeah.
where you want students to get to higher order thinking, and as professors and teachers, we want to be picking on those higher order levels. And then when we get into specific classes, if someone asks you how do you teach an introductory class, well, I do this, this, and this, which is the application.
Yeah.
Those higher order levels to be the basis of your career.
Yeah. When you ask somebody to define bird, for example, you don't want them to say, well, it's like a robin, right? It's moving down. You want it up. So when somebody says, how do you teach? You don't want to say, well, it's like PowerPoint, man, So I think you could probably do that, Bloom's taxonomy. And there are articles about how to implement those kinds of taxonomies with question stems. Evaluate this or compare and contrast, something like that. And so, yeah, we could do it that way. I think it's really good. All right, we have about 5 minutes left, so let me do this. Turn to the person. No, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. Now, find somebody you don't know, real quick. Find somebody you don't know and who looks smarter than you. And, and introduce yourself real quick, and then come up with one observation or question or something that you wish you would have asked had we had more time. All right? Take a minute and do that. Find somebody you don't know, introduce yourself. Okay. All right. I hate to get in the way of your education, but now I just read this next one, which I find really intriguing. My teaching philosophy is to provide students with the critical thinking and problem-solving skills which can be applied in real-life problems. Well, I think it's stated as a goal because it's what are you going to provide, okay? But it implies a whole lot about college is more than just college. It's about real life and about skills versus knowledge. Notice it can drive everything. Because when you go into class and you say, all right, am I going to use green or yellow PowerPoints? Or, am I going to use small groups or large group discussion? What's going to allow students to be more relevant, to have more skills, that kind of thing. Yeah, my teaching philosophy is to provide students with the critical thinking and problem-solving skills which can be applied in real-life problems.
Okay, it missed the values.
I think, again, it implies what's important. And I would argue, obviously, that there's going to be more to this philosophy, because I think there's other goals. There has to be some knowledge, right? Application of skills with what? It implies it, but if I'm reading a bunch of these and I see this, I'm thinking, where's the knowledge? So again, one of the nice things to do here is to make sure that you've covered what you want to cover. Okay. All right, so what questions or comments or observations came up?
Well, I was talking to Hamza about the fact that we have different ways of believing. She has a very holistic view of this whole thing, and I tend to want to either go for the highest thing or find something that's very specific that I can point to.
Yeah, and there's no formula for how this is used. This is a metaphor, and in fact, one of the engineers in the group said, well, what are these numbers? And they're not. They're just because I couldn't find a picture, of only 6. But the idea is, look, this is a informal rubric, if you will, and again, this is a way to judge what's in your philosophy and what's not. And so the idea is, again, looking at how you phrase this. My goal is to, all right? You can then say, I believe that this goal is important, and other goals as well. So you can use it deductively or inductively. Okay, and I don't know what those words mean, but I know one of them is down and one of them is up. You can use them either way. You can use it as you read each sentence. You can talk about how to organize. This reverse way is a great way to organize. I believe that education is, or I believe that my role would be. That leads to treating students with respect, always doing good, fairness in grading. And this leads to, okay, yeah, students, given this relationship, students should be able to. And that's why I do these kinds of things. That's why I do these things. And you know what? Come watch me if you want to see this. Okay.
Actually, I was looking at the whole because I have goals here to write a teaching philosophy. So this is my goal. How can I implement all these elements to write this in order to have a product which will help me to reach my goal? So this is something I'm thinking as a whole.
Right, that's right. Yeah. Other thoughts? Okay. Now, when you go onto the internet and you Google teaching philosophy, you're going to see you got to cover assessment, you got to cover self-improvement and all that. And that's fine. But you can cover them in these levels. To say, I'm going to the National Conference on Teaching of Psychology next week is not part of my philosophy, right? But interacting with peers in order to get better, all right, is a strategy that I use, and it facilitates the goal of improvement. And my value is, I don't know, nobody's perfect, or we can get up.
And also it depends on the topic itself. For example, it's a teaching philosophy, so I have to include some values, some principles, goals, strategies, techniques. But if it's a different topic, I don't think that we always need to include the values and principles. There are different.
Yes. For example, in your syllabus, it may start with goals and go down. Okay? Although my syllabi have been getting longer and longer, and I think having some of these higher order elements can be really useful. Okay? Just to let students know that teaching is hard and that it's not self-evident. Okay? I think a lot of students have the idea that anybody could go and say that same stuff because it would just be, that's what this class would be about. But they don't realize that every minute of every class period you're making a decision about what's going to be important, what's not. So, but I also think that again, and this is, I think here I'm going to end where we pretty much started. This stuff has to be in a philosophy. This stuff, not necessarily. Depends on the purpose, depends on the audience, but if you move to the left, you're going to be in better shape, and you're going to get more creative because it means, oh, I don't have to say, you know, I teach 50 minutes at a time, or you know, these specifics. You can really get, and you can use values that you have that transcend your work. You could do the same thing for a research philosophy as well. And so, and in fact, the values should be the same. I think principles and goals will be very different, but the values could transcend that. And so the question is not who am I as a teacher, but who am I as a professional. Wouldn't it be fun to have a job application where you have a teaching philosophy and then a research statement? They don't say research philosophy. And they both start with the same sentence. How cool would that be? Okay. So let me end it there because I respect people and I don't like to run over. I have a 15-minute break until my next presentation. So if you have questions or anything, let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much.